Welcome to the new edition of Türkiye Talks. Today we will be looking at the increasing cooperation between the Turkic states, especially in Central Asia, whether such union or let's say reunion of the Turkic family is a new opportunity in the region or whether it poses a challenge for the regional countries. As you know, in recent years, Turkey especially tries to increase its capacity to cooperate with the Central Asian countries because there are ethnic ties, there are cultural ties between the two sides. And recently we have seen that Turkey has really helped Azerbaijan to take over the occupied lands from Armenia. And that has also, I think, created a momentum in terms of relationships. And most recently, a summit was convened in Istanbul by the leaders of the Organization of Turkic States. And that was also, I think, taken seriously by some of the countries in the region. Today, we will be looking at these issues and the ramifications of the union and cooperation, increasing cooperation among the Turkic states, especially in Central Asia. Today, our guest is Turan Gafarlı from TRT World. Turan, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. It's a pleasure to host you with Kadir here. Let me start with you. As I have just mentioned, there is an increasing relationship. There's a closer relationship between the states in the Central Asia, especially after the fall of the Soviet Union. We have seen the independent states over there and the recent summit joined by the leaders as well. So what are the main implications of such a union? How you can interpret it, and what sort of reactions you expect from the regional countries like Russia, China, and Iran? The floor is yours, Turan.
Thank you very much, first of all, inviting me, dear Talip Bey. I would like to emphasize the importance of the dissolution of the Soviet Union because it was the first time, actually, Central Asia, with its linkage of the South Caucasus and towards the Turkey, got its independence for this long time. 30 years of independence never happened before, at least in the modern age. Therefore, especially for Azerbaijan, it's a huge achievement to have an independent state for this time period. On the other hand, obviously, the new states, as they emerged, we saw their economy in trouble because after the collapse of the communist regime, their privatization problems and obviously opening to the West, opening to the globalization was under huge pressure. And the privatization of the companies that left from the communist era was a huge problem, which brought a massive, I would say, very angry capitalism to the region, and we saw the natural resources obviously still in the hands of the states, and it created a huge status quo in the area, which brought up the foreign companies, especially from the US or the UK, as we saw in the Azerbaijani example. Hereby, I would like to say also that Turkey's role obviously was huge because after the independence in 1991, Turkey was the first country which recognized those countries, including all Central Asian, Turkic and Azerbaijan as well. Therefore, Turkey's importance for these countries to open towards the West is inevitable, cannot be compared to any other models, and therefore the Turkey model was seen to be an example for those countries. However, not everything was stable during the 1990s, as well as Russia itself. Russia was in a very big trouble in political turmoil, I would say, and also the relations of the Russia and the West wasn't very rapidly developing in economic side. However, in political side, it needed to wait to Putin's era to have some involvement with the US especially. Therefore, Central Asian states could not achieve a perpendicular kind of development as Turkey and Azerbaijan achieved in the last 30 years. They left a bit behind. Therefore, they cannot be compared with Azerbaijan in relations with Turkey, obviously. Therefore, Turkey's involvement, Azerbaijan remained big, it still remains big, but for Central Asia, they got closer with obviously their former partner Russia, and obviously newly we see that Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan especially getting closer with China, obvious reasons, geographic and economic, and therefore Turkey, I would say, started a new initiative in the last 10 years under the umbrella of Organization of Turkic States now, as a former name, a Turkic Council. And this council actually worked to bring the states together politically, because if you talk about culturally or like I would say heritage-wise, Turksoy was already there since 1992, even including the autonomous republics inside Russia or northern Cyprus. Therefore, it was a bigger umbrella than the Turkic Council itself, but obviously it was a cultural side. And as you asked about Russia's, for example, view on this issue, just later this day, I watched the video.
Turan, can I interrupt you for a moment to move to Kadir? Because you have just explained the background. I think that's an excellent introduction to the subject. Now we can come to the Russian reaction or the reaction of other countries. Also, you have mentioned the role of Turkey as one of the countries which put a lot of effort in terms of cooperation. Maybe Kadir can also explain us the background that Turkey has started, because Turkey has been accused of changing axis when Turkey increased its relationship with the Middle East and also with Central Asian states vis-a-vis European Union and US. Kadir, how would you explain Turkey's involvement as explained by Turan a little while ago, that Turkey has also, I think, put a lot of effort and energy in terms of getting closer to the Central Asian countries because of the links, historical links and cultural links. But I think Turan made a very good comment that the Turksoy, or the Cooperation of Council of Turkish-speaking states, as you can see, the emphasis was on Turkish-speaking, the cultural, but now it seems that there is more of a political agenda of the new name.
That's right. Thank you, Talip Hocam, and thank you, Turan, for joining us today. In many ways, like Turan mentioned, with the end of the Cold War, Central Asian states remained largely under the influence of Russia for a long time because of obvious reasons. And at that time, in 1991, Turkey recognized independence of these states. It was the first country to do so, and there was a lot of excitement. We were pretty young, we were teenagers back then, and then I remember that, under Turgut Özal, there was a lot of interest, and Turkey was saying that we are now going to establish, strong relations, strong ties with these countries, and we are going to some people even believe that we could realize a union with these countries. Of course, Turkey's capacity was limited. Turkey remained throughout the 90s involved in sort of taking care of its own domestic affairs, especially PKK terrorism reached its peak in the mid-90s, 94, 95. So Turkey couldn't really make a serious outreach to Central Asian countries, so it remained at the rhetorical level, emphasizing cultural ties, common language, and other aspects of sort of common history. However, Turkey couldn't really establish serious, even trade ties. Remained limited. But in the 2000s and 2010s, Turkey's capacity has increased at so many levels, be it in energy, be it in military, be it in trade, and this carried over to the relations with Central Asian republics as well, especially when it comes to energy, right? The pipeline between Azerbaijan and Turkey became a significant, achievement, and that connects the Azeri resources to Europe. And then now there's a lot of talk about Turkmenistan's gas being exported to Europe. So Turkey is an obvious transitory point in terms of carrying the natural resources of Central Asian republics to Europe. And but Turkey went beyond that, and in the last several years, we've seen that Turkey has sort of elevated its relations with the Central Asian republics to political and strategic levels, even some military ties as well. Turkish, Defense Minister Akar pays regular visits to some of these countries, and they also come to Turkey. There's talks about selling drones to Kyrgyzstan, and so Turkey, in many ways, is trying to achieve what it couldn't in the 90s now, and it is able to do that because it has much bigger, more serious capacity now, and it has an implication in terms of great power competition between, Russia and China. This region is now becoming more important because of the China challenge, right? The United States, we've discussed this in our previous episodes. The US is trying to figure out how to confront China while it competes with it, while it also cooperates with it. And China's reach to Europe through Central Asian republics is one of their, the Belt and Road Initiative. We can discuss that, how serious that is and what it's able to achieve. But like Turan mentioned, China has already established very strong trade ties with a few of these republics. So we are finding that these countries are, it is in their interest to welcome Turkey because it creates a new balancer, let's say, in their ties with Russia and China, especially when there is not a lot of interest by Washington in this region, to be honest. We saw that with the pullout from Afghanistan as well. Turan, maybe you can address more specifically Turkey's ties with, some of the balancing act that Turkey has to play, because Turkey cannot have strong ties with each and every one of these republics, because some of them have tensions among them as well, between them. And Turkic Council is an excellent idea, right? It brings these countries together and makes common declarations and takes positions about some of the political events of our day. But can you maybe give us an idea? You're a specialist in this region, specifically, right? Which countries have what kind of relationships with Turkey and how it might be evolving? I'm sure our audience is not very, I don't think there are many experts on this topic, but maybe you can try to shed some light on that relationship.
Sure. If we want to mention about the single kind of relations of each of the countries in the Central Asia and Turkic states speaking in general, maybe the members of the Turkic speaking organization of Turkic countries, we should mention in the first place Azerbaijan, obviously. Neither of those countries has closer relations than Azerbaijan and Turkey. Maybe the Azerbaijan and Turkey's closeness model is very exceptional in the world. Therefore, the closeness of Azerbaijan and Turkey is desirable for each of those countries. That's why Organization of Turkic States was founded in the first place. Therefore, however, I would like to say that there is also an ideology behind the organization. It's not, I would say, like the 10 years of project or 20 years of project or even like 30 years of project. There is like hundreds of years behind the organization's ideological capacity, the background, the need, the demand for this kind of organization to have the common needs in its foundation. I would say, for example, just one example from the works that they do, except the economics. The basic thing is a common history book, for example, for the children aged 14 that could be taught in all the secondary schools of all the member countries of the organization. This will bring the young people as well together, and that's why the organization is not just calculating today, calculating just the projects, energy projects or economic projects, also calculating the future. And therefore, Turkey's ambitions is very important in this sense. Turkey can be, again, a role model for these countries. However, the major problem is that each of these countries are in different blocks. For example, the Eurasian Economic Union is a very important player in this area. Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and obviously they are very kind of major players in this Eurasian Economic Union. They have a customs union as well in between themselves and in between Russia and obviously with Belarus and Armenia. Therefore, such customs union is not letting the same type of economic development having with Turkey, because Turkey is also in different customs union with Europe. Therefore, this kind of clash in the interests, in economic interests, can be resolved by obviously bilateral agreements. And Turkic Investment Bank, Turkic Investment Fund was the first step, as we saw in this summit as well. It was an initiative that majorly supported by the Uzbekistan's president, Mirziyoyev. And I believe the initial fund was $500 million to create a kind of a common investment fund to invest these projects without going to Asian Development Bank or going to Russia, like to solve the economic problems within the Turkic Union. Therefore, I think that it's a huge step towards the economic fiscal union as well as the Turkey's integration with those countries, because Turkey is majorly energy dependent country and energy is coming from those countries. And I believe the agreement that was made between Turkmenistan and Azerbaijan, selling the gas via Iran, was a huge step, because as you may know, Nabucco project a few years ago was blocked by Russia. They didn't let Turkmenistan to send the gas directly to Europe via Azerbaijan. And therefore, I believe this is a majorly important to solve the Turkey's problems as well as the Turkey's integration to those regions as well. And Turkey is definitely interested in that. We saw, as you said, Kadir Bey, like, for example, weapons, Mr. Akar's visits, say Turkey has open game there, but with a serious rivals. And it will take time, obviously. It will take time, and it will take, obviously, money. The fiscal union is very, very important. I believe the next step will be that one, and Turkic Vision 2040 is including that as well. And that's why I think that will be the major step.
Well, I think let me just try to also contribute what we have already, I think, raised, starting from a little bit background, I think, analysis. In the 1990s and in the early 2000s, as you have mentioned, both of you actually, there was a lot of romantic interest, I would say, in the Central Asian affairs, because after the fall of the Soviet Union, there was a new window of opportunity for people, especially, Turkish nationalism also played a role, and there was a lot of longing, let's say, for cooperation and for union. And as Turan said, that is ideological background, I think, and this sort of nationalism, which contributes to the integration of Turkey with the Turkic-speaking nations and states, has been there, historically speaking. And of course, in the 1990s, it became much more, I think, important. But because of the economic restrictions, because of the military, let's say, capacity of Turkey, so there was not much a move. But also in the 1990s, mid-1990s and early 2000s, we have seen a lot of political divisions within Turkey. I mean, there were a lot of coalition governments, frequent elections, etc. So there was not a calculated, I think, foreign policy or a foreign policy designed for long term. But after the AK Party governments, we can see that there has been an emphasis in Central Asia, in the Balkans, in Africa, in the Middle East. I think we come to a new stage, as you can see. And you have just mentioned, Turan, some of the economic cooperation issues, and Kadir mentioned some energy issues. Now, let me turn to you when it comes to the security arrangements in this region, security cooperation, because I think this is taken much more, I think, seriously. Sometimes it is seen as a threat or a cause of concern, because that sort of cooperation has implications for what's happening in Crimea, what's happening in Ukraine, what might happen in some other regions as well. From that perspective, I think you have just started, but I stopped you earlier. What would be the reaction of Russia? How do you read it?
Yes, the exact thing was mentioned by Sergei Lavrov. I watched that video a few hours ago, and Sergei Lavrov, Russian foreign minister, saying that basically we are aware that Turkic states are creating a kind of organization. They are like changing the organization's name, they are rebranding, and they are like cooperating. And he's saying that we are not against if they want to cooperate economically, culturally, or they want to like develop their common language, that's fine. but until the point that they are cooperating in defense. So that's his point. That's his line. That's he's stating that Russia's line is the cooperation among the Turkic states on the security field, in armies, in having a common defense pact, or like developing common defense doctrines. That's Russia's led line, as mentioned by the top diplomat of Russia. Therefore, I would say Russia is not very keen on seeing another pact is evolving in its borders. Obviously, after especially what happened in Karabakh, Russia already lost the high ground, I would say, because Russia is now sharing his stage with Turkey in South Caucasus as never happened before. And I would say I agree with Talip Hoca that it's a result of the last 2 decades foreign policy of Turkey that resulted with the game changing in South Caucasus. And obviously Russia doesn't want to see the same issue happening in Central Asia for obvious reasons. And that's why they are very against of what's happening. And Lavrov also mentions that OSCE meeting he will meet Mevlut Çavuşoğlu, and he says we will discuss these issues. We'll discuss what will happen in the Turkic states in the future. And therefore, as we see that Russia is actually seeing Turkey as a kingmaker here, as a major player here. That's why Russia is taking Turkey very seriously on this issue, and actually speaking with Turkey's foreign minister rather than speaking any other members' foreign minister of these issues. Therefore, they are well aware of the Turkey's defense capacity and what Turkey can export to those regions. Already, Azerbaijan is changing its army model from Soviet model to the Turkish model to the NATO model, and they are, I believe, very concerned that it may expand to the other Central Asian states, which is obviously would be very bad for them, because almost 99% of commanders of the Central Asian republics' armies are educated in Russia. Their major language is Russian. Their major doctrines are Russian army's doctrines. So it's a fear.
Well, I think we all know that, Russia does not want to let these countries or these states to be, on their own in all affairs. But it's been almost, 30 years since the independence of those states. And I think there is some sort of maturity in the decision-making processes of the Turkic-speaking countries. Turkmenistan, for example, Turkmenistan was not very close to Turkey, to be honest. But in the last couple of years, we see that there's a lot of rapprochement between the countries, and the leader of Turkmenistan came to Istanbul for the summit, and Turkmenistan became the observer, I think, member of the Organization of Turkic States, not the full member at the moment. And also last week, President Erdogan visited Turkmenistan for an international meeting, and I think also we have seen that a lot of talks were taking place, especially with regard to energy cooperation, with regard to economic cooperation as well. I think one also should see that, we can see gradually those countries would like to have a more liberated, let's say, decision-making mind in their own capacity. But I think also Iran is over there and China is there, as mentioned by Kadir. Maybe Kadir would like to pick on that, but if he doesn't want to, you can just continue what would be okay, Kadir.
Well, I think, Turan, I would like to maybe a little bit revise what you said about Azerbaijan. Russia remains the kingmaker there. I think it has accommodated what Turkey did to help Azerbaijan. It had to. It didn't have. It can't define the rules of the game 100% of the time. There's Azerbaijan's own interests and policy, and then there's Turkey's interests and policy. And, Russia has been kind of smart about how to accommodate those. At the end of the day, still, they remain on the ground. They are strong. They are sort of able to bring both sides to the table. And of course, Turkey made a lot of headway, both in supporting Azerbaijan and then achieving sort of that transitory route in Nakhchivan area. So I think a similar scenario can play out in, like you said, Lavrov says, military cooperation is our red line almost. I don't know if he used the word red line, but obviously Russia wouldn't want too much of a change in terms of defense doctrines of these countries. But at the same time, the world is not sitting where, you know, it's not static, and China makes a lot of inroads in this region, and China's being counterbalanced by Turkey in terms of economy, trade, energy. Those might be, to some extent at least, welcome from the Russian perspective. But of course, they don't want it to go too far where Turkey is able to, you know, create some sort of defense pact with these countries or deepen its defense relationship, and they would prefer it to remain in the training and advising levels. But I think while Russian preferences are like you said, these countries are increasingly, you know, their energy prices are really high around the world right now in the international markets, and that gives them more resources, financial muscle in some ways. Like you mentioned, they even created this new fund, although it's only $500 million compared to, you know, China's Asian Development Bank. It has much smaller resources, but it's nevertheless sending a signal to the international community, to China, that there are other options that these Turkic states can create on their own, some, you know, financing options and development projects on their own with their own resources. So I understand, you know, the Russian apprehension, maybe hesitance about Turkey's inroads here, but it's also in the Russian interest, to some extent at least, that, you know, Turkey is there so that it's not just China sort of being able to finance things and then doing trade with these countries, and they're more and more dependent on China, and eventually Chinese military, you know, cooperation could be even stronger. So I think there's a bit of a nuance there. I'm not, you know, disagreeing with what you said, just the characterization about, you know, Russian role in the Azerbaijan and Karabakh conflict. I just wanted to kind of, if you have a response to that, that's fine. But if we can go back to Central Asian countries, do you think that they see Turkey as a counterbalancer in the way that I described? And something I believe that, you know, Washington doesn't quite appreciate, and they should. How do you think they see Turkey's role?
You know, there was a saying that in 1990s, Turkey was a big brother to those all countries. I mean, that was a very much used phrase, a big brother for Turkey. But I would say Kazakhstan, especially under the leadership of Nazarbayev, was always aimed to take over that big brother role. Therefore, Kazakhstan's influence, I would say, should never be underestimated in Central Asia, especially as far as the Nazarbayev lives, especially his figure. And he is also honorary chairman of the organization of the Turkic states. And often he mentions that the organization's idea is belonging to him. Therefore, I say Turkey's influence is very much welcomed. However, especially Kazakhstan, I'm saying Kazakhstan because it's the largest economy and largest country as per territory there. Therefore, Kazakhstan is never actually considering to cut the ties with Russia once for all. But it does not mean that Kazakhstan is committed itself to Russia. Obviously, there are major problems. There were much bigger problems in 1990s, as almost half of the population of Kazakhstan was Russian, and there were huge kind of separatist movements inside Kazakhstan as well. But now they solved it mostly, and therefore they are acting more independently, I would say. But still, Turkey is not 100%, I would say, alternative model, but still, always Turkey is listened in the region, always taken into serious account, and always considered as a brotherly country without any kind of prejudices toward the region. And the Turkey's approach to the region is not self-centered, is not completely dominated by what Ankara says, as it was maybe in the early 1990s. It's all changed. So I say Central Asian countries, especially Kazakhstan, wants to see the equal kind of partnership rather than having a guidance now, or rather than having a role now. And they are saying like, okay, we are a country located in the very, very middle of Russia. So we need to have this model, but obviously we are open to cooperation for any Turkic states, and especially with Turkey as regard of the bridge with the West. And for me, if you ask my personal opinion, Kazakhstan doesn't even need Turkey to open itself to the West, because it's been almost 30 years that the US and UK firms are only operating in the Kazakhstan and having supplying like a fiscal kind of stability for Kazakhstan. But still, Turkic unity is what they want as well.
Okay, now can I come in here just for a second? You know, Kadir, you asked about the maybe views of the leaders when it comes to Turkey's role in the region. But now let's turn to the public opinion, how public opinion matters anyway, whether it makes any difference in the countries. But in Turkey, I think it encourages government to have closer links with the Turkic states. I mean, this is obvious. Across the ideological divide in Turkey, I mean, if you ask people in the opposition in the government, many people would argue that I think Turkey, you know, makes a good decision when Turkey tries to become closer to the Central Asian countries. And it seems that there is also a very strong public opinion in Turkey. I mean, there is not a debate in Turkey whether, you know, there should be such a cooperation. But when it comes to Middle East and Africa, there is, you know, a little bit of division. But there is a huge public support to the government in this issue. What is the public opinion in the Central Asian governments? And if that public opinion is taken seriously by the decision makers?
Basically, if we're speaking about the public opinion in Central Asia, it's obviously not as much as matters as in Turkey. Obviously, Turkey is much more developed democracy, has strong democratic kind of values and history and past of the at least 90 years of experience in Republic. And therefore, I would say, compared to Turkey, the Central Asian states especially are still in the stage of development in the sense of that public opinion and the other kind of non-governmental organizations and etc. Therefore, public opinion was most probably the most discussed issue in Turkey as well, and a matter of the Central Asian Republic's populations, because whenever you ask about the union of the Turkic states in Turkey, people are immediately reacting that if the Central Asian population sees the same kind of links as Turkey see in themselves. Therefore, I spoke to many Central Asians, and they are categorically divided into many categories. There are older generation which has still seeing their ties in Russia, which are still living in the so-called Soviet Union. There is a middle kind of aged people who are mostly like working for the state companies or like the state organizations. They tend to be much closer to Turkey because most of them actually knowing Turkish very well, especially in Kyrgyzstan. The people are speaking Turkish very well, even if it's because the schools or the Turkish TV series, Turkish soft power, still people has a certain understanding of the Turkish. Therefore, those, I would say, the age group is much more closer to Turkey. When it comes to the young generation, there's a huge division in the young generation because some of them, which are wealthy and very well connected to the government, they are mostly schooled in the West, in either UK or in the US, and therefore they are very much English speaking oriented and more Western open. And there is obviously the generation which speaks Russian better than their mother tongue, and therefore that generation sees themselves much more closer to the Russia. And there is another generation which is the continuation of those middle-aged people, which is speaking Turkish and looking to the Turkish TV series, basically following the world from the Turkish eyes. Therefore, there's a huge division there. And there's also a new generation raising in Kyrgyzstan especially, which is following Chinese and Korean cultures. And therefore, they are becoming much more Asian-oriented, speaking more than 2 Asian languages, and starting seeing themselves in Chinese universities rather than Russian or the Western. Therefore, there's a huge investment by China to those regions as well, sending free school textbooks, building free schools, and having their soft power enriched to that area. And it was the same tactic that used by Russians until now. But still, we see that in many countries, for example, in Uzbekistan or in Turkmenistan, states are getting more anxious about Russian-speaking civil servants. Therefore, for example, Uzbekistan last year banned using Russian in state conversations, even though if it's informal, they banned it. Therefore, Russian language is also getting out from the formal conversations. For example, like the change of the alphabet as well to the Latin is a very big kind of step towards that. But the Chinese seeing this opportunity as to get into the Central Asia. Therefore, I would say it's very mixed. I'm obviously like taking outside Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is a completely different case. Azerbaijan's case maybe can be answered for hours here, but Azerbaijan is different here.
Turan, I have a quick question. You mentioned the Chinese cultural influence in some of these countries. I was going to ask you how they see China strategically and politically in this region. I'm sure that depends on the country, but can you maybe talk about that a little bit? And do they see it like I described earlier, the options between, Russia, Turkey, China, or Chinese investment, Chinese trade is a given for all these countries? They don't even, question it that much, or are they more apprehensive about it? They would prefer other countries to come in and counterbalance China? Because China is a big debate in Washington. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's very, very important question, because the problem is not about choice, but being very much dependent on the Chinese money, because there is no alternative than the prospect of Belt and Road, or like the Chinese maybe money, or Asian Development Bank, which can invest that amount of money to those countries. Because like if we consider Western companies or Western money, they are very much calculative in this issue. They're calculating what's happening in Afghanistan, what's happening in the region, the opportunity of, for example, the profit or the risks of war and everything. But Chinese are not very much considering these factors. For Chinese, it's more strategic goal rather than economic profit. Therefore, the Belt and Road projects strategic long-term goals are much more important than profiting it. And if you consider, let's say, middle or low-income Central Asian family and their approach towards the Chinese, they do not see the Chinese face as we see it. They're mostly seeing the Chinese company coming to low-class kind of town and building a factory where the people, for example, kid's father, working and bringing money to home. Therefore, they are automatically gaining sympathy towards Chinese, which they do not see the same kind of empathy from their own governments. Therefore, it's a seriously considered issue in the capitals of Central Asia. They are seeing it as a strategic threat to the sovereignty as well. For example, in the case of the Uyghurs, or in the case of the pressure from China to Kazakhstan for the political prisoners and everything. Therefore, they are careful, but they know that there is no alternative. Unfortunately, there are no such big amount of money coming from other sources, including Russia as well, because Russia is already made their own spots for last 100 years, and they are not very much interested in building in railroads or anything else. It's more of a China's job to create a new kind of ways for themselves outside and go to the West.
Okay, I think with that, we come to the end of this edition. Turan, thank you very much for joining us, and also Kadir, all the way from Washington, D.C. Thank you for your contribution and your questions. To our audience, we would like to say goodbye to all of you, and hopefully we can come together at a different edition. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you.